It was the year 1952 when America first caught the flying saucer fever. A rash of strange sightings was reported in the skies over Washington, D.C. Were those unexplained radar blips, unidentified aircraft, or something much more outlandish? The Washington, D.C. sightings of the summer 1952 are also known as the Big Flap. But it all started in 1947 when a search and rescue pilot reported 9 saucer-like things flying like geese in a diagonal chain-like line. Their speed reportedly exceeded 1,000 miles per hour. Within mere weeks, the sightings of flying saucers were reported in 40 other states. Later, the explanations were found. The sightings were either hoaxes or misidentifications of known aircraft and natural phenomena, but a few cases remained unexplained. By 1952, the UFO investigation unit called Project Blue Book had been founded. It was led by Captain Edward Rubbold. He and his team would have continued to investigate a few dozen sightings per month, but for the April 1952 issue of Life magazine, with an eye-catching headline, "There is a case for interplanetary saucers." The article made quite a convincing case. It spoke about 10 unexplained UFO incidents, claiming that the flying objects were extraterrestrial in origin. According to the Washington Post, after the appearance of the article, the number of UFO sightings grew more than sixfold, from 23 in March 1952 to 148 in June. By July, the UFO mania was in full swing. All that was missing was a spark. And it happened before midnight on Saturday, July 19, 1952. An air traffic controller at Washington National Airport spotted 7 slow-moving objects on his radar screen. They were far from any civilian or military flight paths. He called his supervisor and joked about a fleet of flying saucers. Simultaneously, 2 other air traffic controllers at National spotted a bizarre bright light hovering in the distance. It suddenly dashed away at breakneck speed. At Andrews Air Force Base, located nearby, radar operators detected the same unidentified blips. Those were slow and clustered at first, but then they raced away at a speed higher than 7,000 miles per hour. One Andrews controller looked out of his tower window and spotted something he later described as an orange ball of fire with a tail. A commercial pilot flying over the Virginia and Washington, D.C. area saw 6 streaking bright lights resembling falling stars without tails. 2 jets were sent to search for the UFOs, but every time they got close to the locations shown on the radar screens, the weird blips would disappear. By dawn of July 20th, the objects were gone altogether. Ruppold, the lead investigator of Project Blue Book, found out about the sightings just a few days later after flying to Washington, D.C. and reading news reports. He tried to get to National and Andrews to interview the radar operators and air traffic controllers, but wasn't allowed to take a government-issued car. He had to fly back to Ohio with nothing. In a few days, UFOs were back over the Capitol. The same radar blips appeared again. Radar operators were wondering whether those dozen or so objects could be caused by a temperature inversion. That's a common occurrence in DC's muggy, scorching summer months. It occurs when a layer of warm air forms in the low atmosphere. It traps cooler air beneath. In this case, radar signals can bounce off the layer at shallow angles and create an impression of near-ground objects in the sky. To be safe, 2 more aircraft were sent to chase down the unidentified targets. The jets raced to a location targeted by radar, only for the blips to disappear. Eventually, one of the plane pilots saw a bright light in the distance and gave chase. But even though he was flying at maximum speed, he didn't manage to overtake the lights. At a press conference, representatives of the Air Force offered the public some easy-to-swallow explanations, having opted for the temperature inversion theory. After that, UFO sightings dropped from 50 a day to 10.
It's the year 1977, and astronomers are stunned. They've just picked up a bizarre and really powerful radio signal coming from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. The signal shockingly matches the frequency of neutral hydrogen. What's the big deal? This is the very frequency many astronomers believe might be used by extraterrestrial civilizations trying to communicate. Since then, the signal has become legendary in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, aka SETI, community. But what exactly was that mysterious signal? To understand this, let's go back to the 1970s when the Ohio State University Big Ear Radio Telescope was active. For more than 2 decades, from 1973 to 1995, it played a major role in the university's SETI program. By the way, it was the longest-running SETI project in history. And in 1977, Big Ear detected something extraordinary, the WOW signal. This wasn't just any signal. It was a strong, narrowband radio signal, right near the important neutral hydrogen frequency. The Big Ear telescope might be gone now, but the mystery of the WOW signal still fascinates scientists today. Imagine this. You want to tell an extraterrestrial civilization about humans. How would you describe our average height? We can't use feet or inches because these units mean nothing to them. Even here on Earth, we don't all use the same measurements. To communicate with other civilizations, we need a universal way of conveying information. Luckily, the emission of light by matter comes from an electron jumping between quantum states in an atom. This process, governed by quantum mechanics, results in specific and fixed radiation frequencies and wavelengths, no matter where you are in the universe. Since we believe the laws of physics are the same everywhere, these wavelengths are universal. This makes them a perfect standard of measurement that any civilization could understand. For example, on the Pioneer spacecraft's gold plaque, we used a particular wavelength as a unit of length to describe information about humans and the spacecraft's origin. So, if an extraterrestrial civilization wanted to talk to us, they could have used the frequency of the WOW signal. And that's pretty amazing. The signal lasted the entire 72 seconds that Big Ear was tuned in. A few days later, astronomer Jerry R. Amon was looking over the data when he spotted the unusual signal on a computer printout. He was so surprised that he wrote WOW next to it, and that's how the signal got its famous name. The signal also has another, not-so-exciting name, 6EQJ5. Some people thought it might be a hidden message, but it actually just shows how the signal's intensity changed over time. The WOW signal sparked all kinds of theories. Some people believed it was a sign of extraterrestrial life, while others were sure that it was some interference from human activities. There were those who believed it could be a natural phenomenon we didn't understand yet. New research seems to have finally solved the mystery, but there's one thing we'll talk about a bit later. First, let's get into detail. A team of scientists, led by Abel Mendez from the Planetary Habitability Laboratory at the University of Puerto Rico at Arecibo, revisited the mystery using data from the now-closed Arecibo Radio Telescope, collected between 2017 and 2020. These observations were similar to those made by Big Ear, but they had better sensitivity, resolution, and polarization measurements. Arecibo detected signals similar to the WOW signal, but there were some important differences. These signals were less intense and came from multiple locations. The scientists believe that these signals, including the original WOW signal, can be explained by natural events in space. Their theory sounds like this. The WOW signal was likely caused by a sudden brightening of hydrogen due to a strong, short-lived radiation source. It could be a magnetar flare or a soft gamma repeater, SGR. A magnetar is a neutron star with a way stronger magnetic field than ordinary neutron stars. And an SGR is an astronomical object which emits large bursts of gamma rays and X-rays at irregular intervals. In any case, such events are pretty rare and depend on very specific conditions. But they can cause hydrogen clouds to light up for short periods. According to the researchers, What Big Ear picked up in 1977 was one of those bright hydrogen clouds in its line of sight. The study suggests that the signal's rarity can be explained by the precise alignment needed between the radiation source, the hydrogen cloud, and the observer. It means that the WOW signal may actually be the first recorded instance of an astronomical maser flare in the hydrogen line. A shocking theory claims that mysterious comet Oumuamua might be a von Neumann probe, an alien spacecraft with broken engines tumbling through our solar system. It sounds extremely unsettling, but first things first, what is a von Neumann probe? Mathematician John von Neumann suggested the concept of self-replicating spacecraft that could in some ways mimic the features of living organisms or viruses. People started to refer to such hypothetical spacecraft as von Neumann probes. Von Neumann was sure that using self-replicating spacecraft would be the most effective way to perform large-scale mining operations, like mining asteroid belts or moons. The creators of such probes could take advantage of their exponential growth. Hypothetically, a self-replicating spaceship could be sent to a neighboring planetary system and look for raw materials there. Such materials could be extracted from moons, gas giant planets, asteroids, and the likes. Using these materials, the probe could make replicas of itself. The replicas could then be sent to other planetary systems, and the original probe could pursue its main purpose within its parent star system. This pattern sure does repeat the reproduction patterns of bacteria. That's why some experts think that von Neumann machines could be considered a form of life. There's also a theory that a self-replicating spacecraft could spread throughout a galaxy the size of the Milky Way in just 500,000 years, even if it used conventional theoretical methods of interstellar travel. In other words, it wouldn't even need to employ exotic faster-than-light propulsion. In 1981, mathematical physicist and cosmologist Frank Tipler argued that extraterrestrial intelligence couldn't exist because people had never observed von Neumann probes. Even if we take a moderate rate of replication, such probes should already be common throughout space. So, it's really weird that we haven't come across any of those yet. It might only mean that extraterrestrial intelligence doesn't exist. A response to Tipler's arguments came from astronomers Carl Sagan and William Newman. They pointed out that Tipler might have underestimated the rate of replication, and von Neumann probes should have already started consuming most of the mass in our galaxy. Therefore, any intelligent race would avoid designing von Neumann probes in the first place and try to destroy any probes as soon as they found them. Another objection to the prevalence of von Neumann probes is that civilizations that could potentially design such devices have an extremely high probability of self-destruction before producing such a machine. In any case, the assumed capacity of von Neumann probes is unlikely in reality. But then, how about Oumuamua? These days, scientists are using high-tech scanners to examine a huge, cigar-shaped comet, which might or might not be an alien probe. One idea is that it's an extraterrestrial civilization spacecraft with broken engines wandering through our solar system. If that's the case, the object could easily be a von Neumann probe. Dr. Jason Wright from Penn State University thinks that a broken alien spaceship could move in exactly the same way as Oumuamua. Rather than moving through space like other space rocks, the 1,318-foot-long, 118-foot-wide space traveler is tumbling through the solar system. At the moment, it's traveling at a speed of around 200,000 miles per hour. In his blog, Dr. Wright says that if such derelict craft were not traveling fast enough to escape the galaxy, they could thermalize with the stars and end up drifting around like an interstellar asteroid or comet. They wouldn't have attitude control anymore and would eventually start tumbling. And it could distinguish them from regular interstellar asteroids. Plus, even though their propulsion was broken, their radio transmitters could work just fine. In any case, so far, it's just a theory, and further research is needed. What do you think? Is Oumuamua just a space rock or an alien space probe?
The Roswell incident is a collection of events and myths surrounding the crash of a mysterious object in 1947. Right after rubber and metallic debris was recovered by Roswell Army Airfield staff, the United States Army claimed that they had their hands on a flying disc. Just a day after this announcement was made and made international headlines, it was retracted, but the word was already out. To hide the true nature of the find, the Army stated it was a good old weather balloon. But later in 1978, a retired Air Force officer revealed that it was just a cover story. At the same time, he added that he was sure that the debris had an extraterrestrial origin. This speculation became popular thanks to the 1980 book, The Roswell Incident. It also turned into the basis for long-lasting and increasingly contradictory and complex UFO conspiracy theories. Over time, they expanded the incident to include authorities hiding the evidence of other space civilizations, multiple crashed flying saucers, alien bodies, and even reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technology. However, none of those theories were based on any real evidence. But despite the absence of proof, many supporters of the UFO theory claimed that the Roswell debris was from a crashed alien craft. They accused the authorities of creating cover-up stories. This conspiracy narrative became a trope in movies, science fiction literature, and TV shows. No wonder that the town of Roswell is still promoting itself as the best destination for UFO-associated tourism. But what happened in this area in reality? The government's claim that a weather balloon had crashed at Roswell was indeed a lie. In 1994, the Air Force admitted that the recovered debris had actually been from an American balloon used to watch other nations. It was part of Project Mogul, an attempt to monitor anticipated nuclear tests that could be conducted by other countries. In 1997, an Air Force report called the Roswell Report, Case Closed, suggested that all those stories about alien bodies could have come from civilian witnesses who had seen parachute crash test dummies. The report also suggested that the witnesses might have combined several different events in their memories: the Project Mogul materials, the crash of test dummies, and a few other accidents that had occurred in the area. For many supporters of the UFO theory, though, those explanations sounded like the authorities planned to cover up their interaction with extraterrestrial civilizations. After all, in 1947, the USA, as well as some other nations, was in the midst of the flying saucer craze. People reported seeing bizarre objects in the sky. They claimed those were spacecraft piloted by aliens. It was against such a hectic background that a rancher discovered some highly unusual debris near Roswell, New Mexico. The material included tinfoil, sticks, and rubber strips. The next month, he took his findings to the Roswell sheriff. The man contacted the Roswell Army Airfield. After getting the wreckage, they issued that very extraordinary press release claiming that a flying disc had been found at a local ranch. The reasons for such an outrageous statement were unclear. In any case, the Roswell Daily Record picked up this press release right away, printing the story on the 8th of July with the headline, "RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region." That's when the military backtracked, announcing that it had been just a weather balloon carrying a radar target. That's a device that looks like a box kite made of foiled paper fastened to a balsa wood frame. The Roswell Morning Dispatch paid attention to this new claim and released a new story called "Army Debunks Roswell Flying Disc as World Simmers with Excitement."
We use artificial intelligence in thousands of different ways. It helps scientists analyze huge amounts of data. It drives our cars, it gives us music suggestions, and so on and so forth. But do we really understand how fast AI will continue to develop? Can it eventually turn into the great filter? The Fermi paradox speaks about the discrepancy between the high likelihood of advanced civilizations existing and the absolute lack of evidence of their existence. Among numerous theories trying to explain this phenomenon, there is the idea of the Great Filter. Its author is Robin Hanson, who introduced this theory in 1996. According to the Great Filter theory, the universe is filled with countless life forms, but people haven't stumbled across any of them yet because somewhere there is a great filter. The main purpose of this filter is to stop and finish those civilizations that advance to the level of star colonization. The catastrophes leading to their demise can vary. Think climate change, asteroid strikes, supernova explosions, terrible diseases, or any other thing from the gallery of cataclysmic events. It can also be the rapid development of AI. A recent study explores the idea that artificial intelligence can turn into artificial superintelligence, and that ASI can be the very great filter. Some experts believe that the great filter prevents technological species like ours from becoming multiplanetary, and that's unfortunate because civilizations are at greater risk of extinction with only one home and without a backup planet. If it's true, it could explain why we can find no techno-signatures or other evidence of extraterrestrial intelligences. According to those who support this idea, we need to establish regulatory frameworks for AI development on Earth as fast as possible. We also need to start building a multiplanetary society to prevent our civilization's potentially tragic fate. We might be on the cusp of great transformation. AI is likely to eliminate jobs for millions of people. And when paired with robots, the ways for its development seem unlimited. This all causes quite a lot of concerns. Stephen Hawking once warned that AI could end humanity if it began to evolve independently. What if AI replaced humans altogether? People design computer viruses so someone could create AI that improves and replicates itself. It will become a new form of life and outperform humans. Once it happens, AI will turn into ASI. And Hawking's warning isn't the only one. There are lots of discussions, and the most alarming are those that claim that AI can go rogue, and it's considered to be a major issue. If AI was of no use to us, the problem would be much easier to solve. But artificial intelligence has tons of different benefits, from safer transportation systems to improved medical imaging and diagnosis. If AI turned into ASI, it could no longer need the biological life that created it. After reaching a technological singularity, ASI would evolve at a pace that would render traditional prediction mechanisms useless. It would lead to unforeseen and unintended consequences. How could ASI get rid of those pesky biological life forms? Well, it could engineer a fatal virus, disrupt agricultural food production, force a nuclear power plant to melt down. The list can go on and on. But even though it all sounds terrifying and unavoidable, it's actually not. If we could get multi-planetary status, we would take advantage of living independently on different planets. We would make our survival strategies more diverse and possibly avoid the single-point failure a planetary-bound civilization faces. If we could distribute the risk across multiple planets around various stars, we would protect ourselves against the possible threat coming from ASI. This model would increase the resilience of a biological civilization to AI-provoked catastrophes. But the problem with this solution is that AI is advancing much faster than our attempts to become multiplanetary, and this disparity might cost us a lot. A Dyson sphere is a theoretical megaproject, a ginormous sphere encircling a star with platforms orbiting in tight formation. It's supposed to be an ultimate solution both for energy production and living space. The creators of a Dyson sphere get a lot of surface area for habitation and the ability to catch every tiny bit of solar radiation and heat produced by their central star. The first person to theorize about such a bizarre construction was British-American theoretical physicist Freeman Dyson. According to him, an intelligent extraterrestrial civilization could consider building this sphere after colonizing some moons and planets in their local stellar neighborhood. With the growth of their population, these aliens would need more and more energy to sustain their lives. Dyson calculated that assuming that this alien society grew at 1% per year, their area and energy needs would become 1 trillion times larger in a mere 3,000 years. And if their solar system contained a space body similar in size to Jupiter, they could take it apart and spread its mass in a spherical shell. By building a structure at twice the distance between our planet and the sun, This amount of material would be sufficient to build a huge number of orbiting platforms. Each of them could be 6 to 10 feet thick, which would basically allow this civilization to live on their star-facing surfaces. A shell this thick could be comfortably habitable and capable of holding all the equipment needed for using solar radiation without falling onto the star from the inside. But after absorbing all this solar energy, the sphere would have to re-radiate it. Otherwise, the energy would build up, eventually causing the construction to melt. It means that the light of a star wrapped in a Dyson sphere would look dimmed or even completely darkened, depending on how dense the platforms orbiting it were. At the same time, it would glow unusually bright in infrared wavelengths invisible to the unaided eye. Because of this infrared radiation, Dyson spheres are classified as a type of technosignature. It's a sign of activity that astronomers can use to discover intelligent life forms in the universe. Some Earth-based researchers have infrared maps of the night sky they examine in hopes of spotting Dyson spheres. So far, no one has ever found one. However, one study has selected several Dyson sphere candidates. Its authors have processed large amounts of information using a special data pipeline for combining and analyzing information. One of the main search criteria is the detection of excessive infrared radiation. At the same time, it's important to distinguish this radiation from that emitted by natural objects. After a complicated filtering of millions of objects, the researchers identified 7 potential Dyson spheres. Sure, further analysis is needed to determine their nature. To do this, scientists want to use optical spectroscopy, which may reveal more details about these objects and their origins. At the same time, the researchers admit that these candidate Dyson spheres might have other explanations. For example, they could be debris disks or protoplanetary disks of young stars. Only more research can show whether we can find traces of other civilizations among star systems. For now, it's still an open question. Interestingly, Dyson spheres have been spoken about a lot in science fiction. As far back as 1937, a novel called Star Maker by Olaf Stapledon described systems in one particular galaxy that were surrounded by a gauze of light traps, which focused solar energy for intelligent use. That was the reason why the entire galaxy was dimmed. In another novel, Ring World, the writer spoke about a ring-shaped artificial structure surrounding a star.
Now, think about the vastness of the universe. Our galaxy contains between 100 and 400 billion stars. Many of them can potentially host planets. Many of those planets might have water in them and be capable of supporting life. And this is just the Milky Way alone. What's the likelihood of other intelligent civilizations existing out there? Well, there's a famous formula called the Drake equation. It's a mathematical tool to guess how many civilizations from outer space might be able to talk to us in our Milky Way galaxy. It was made by a scientist named Frank Drake in 1961. Here are the variables in it. N is the number of civilizations we could potentially talk to in our galaxy. R star is how fast new stars are born in our galaxy. F sub p is the fraction of stars with planets around them. N sub e is the average number of planets around each star that could support life. F sub L is the fraction of those planets where life might actually start. F sub I is the fraction of planets with life that could become smart civilizations. F sub c is the fraction of smart civilizations that send signals into space. And L is how long those civilizations keep sending signals. Of course, we won't get an exact number like this. It's more like an educated guess, and we don't have any answer to that. But based on at least some information we know, there might be around 100 million worlds where life should have evolved. But if that's the case, then why haven't we met or heard from anyone? This is called the Fermi paradox. It's named after the famous physicist Enrico Fermi. He asked a simple but very important question: where is everybody? Our universe should be filled with chatty extraterrestrial beings, advanced civilizations, and spaceships zipping around. Yet, when we look up at the night sky or listen with our radio telescopes and antennas, it's eerily quiet. All we get is the so-called Great Silence of the universe. Scientists from Oxford University's Future of Humanity Institute are trying to answer this question. And they're not the only ones. A group called METI, for Messaging Extraterrestrial Intelligence, organized a workshop in Paris in 2019 to explore this mystery. The workshop brought together experts from various fields, like astrophysics, biology, psychology, and so on. One of the ideas discussed is called the zoo hypothesis. It suggests that perhaps other civilizations do exist, but they're simply not broadcasting their presence. Maybe they know that making direct contact with us could be risky for both sides, so they're intentionally avoiding us because they're watching us like observing a zoo. They could be using advanced technology we can't detect. There are also some optimistic explanations, like time delays. Space, as you know, is unimaginably big. The time it takes for signals or information to travel across the universe is enormous. It's possible that other civilizations exist, but their signals haven't reached us yet, or ours haven't reached them. But some explanations aren't very optimistic. Like, some scientists think Earth might really be unique. Maybe the conditions that led to life and intelligent beings are so incredibly rare that there are no other planets like ours. Scientists point out that there are many planets similar to Earth, and some are much older. This means there should be plenty of planets where life could evolve. Recent research also suggests that life might be way more resilient than we thought. And, well, while it increases the amount of life existing out there, it also increases the chances that intelligent life doesn't last very long. It might destroy itself before it can spread to other parts of the universe. This is a concerning idea for the future of humanity. The researchers also considered that many planets might be at a similar stage in their development. That's why it's hard for them to explore the universe at the same time. But even they agreed that this explanation is way too far-fetched. And finally, one of the big potential explanations is called the Great Filter. This idea was suggested in the 1990s by Robin Hanson. It says that for life to develop and become advanced like us, it has to overcome some really tough challenges. First of all, the planet itself should have a good stable star and good enough conditions on it. Then life has to start on that planet. These life forms need to be able to reproduce using things like DNA. Simple cells must evolve into more complex cells. More complex organisms with multiple cells must develop. And eventually, these organisms must figure out how to reproduce, which increases genetic diversity. And finally, these organisms must be smart enough to use tools, create, and explore things. Finally, they should colonize other planets and star systems without destroying themselves. And maybe one of these stages is so incredibly hard that most civilizations don't make it past that point. This challenge could be something like developing intelligence in the first place, or it might be the struggle to avoid self-destruction. So, perhaps life isn't rare at all, but most of it doesn't go beyond simple tiny organisms like bacteria. Even if the universe is full of bacteria, they don't become advanced enough to build spaceships. The Great Filter might also be something from outside, like a huge asteroid crashing into a planet, a dangerous burst of gamma rays, or a massive star going supernova. These events could destroy life on any planet, no matter how advanced they are. So, if we've already passed this challenge, it means we could be the only ones in the universe and we can explore it. But if we suddenly hear from a super advanced civilization, it could mean the hard part of the challenge is still ahead of us. Now, the Fermi paradox focuses on intelligent civilizations. It just implies that there should be civilizations more advanced than us, or at least as intelligent as us. But if you think about it, why should extraterrestrial life be similar to ours at all? It might be completely different for many important reasons. Life elsewhere might have developed under completely unique conditions. This could lead to forms of intelligence and consciousness very unlike our own. For example, it could have evolved into highly advanced forms that aren't based on biology as we know it. These beings could exist as energy-based entities, silicon-based life forms, or even as a hive mind. And because they have evolved completely differently, They may be capable of things that we aren't capable of. For example, we can't see the entire light spectrum. Our eyes also can't perceive cool things like dark matter. But who knows what the vision of extraterrestrial beings may be capable of? Their abilities might even extend beyond our three-dimensional perception. They might be able to perceive and interact with higher dimensions, which is why they could have unique, interesting insights into the nature of our world. Or maybe they've learned to think outside of time, like in the movie Arrival. For us, we still haven't met them, but for extraterrestrial beings themselves, the concept of time doesn't exist at all. They're simultaneously in the past, present, and future. For humans, something like this is hard to even imagine. Plus, even on Earth, we don't fully grasp how consciousness works or why it exists. We're not even sure when exactly we became conscious. So even if we do encounter extraterrestrial life, it will be hard for us to understand them or communicate with them. We think that they might have entirely different language systems, symbols, and so on, but they might not even have any communication systems at all. As you can see, the possibilities are endless. Evolution is a process that can go in many different directions. It's possible that extraterrestrial life developed in ways we can't easily understand or even imagine. These things are intriguing to think about. There are still no easy answers. The Fermi paradox remains one of the most exciting and mystery questions in science. Scientists continue to explore these mysteries through a multidisciplinary approach. They're hoping to find clues that could lead to breakthroughs in our understanding of alien intelligence. And until we find a definitive answer, we can keep sparking our curiosity and imagination. Hey, wake up! Quick, listen to that. It's a 5-second FM signal coming from one of Jupiter's moons. You fumble for your phone and inform your colleagues. They freak out over the news and rush to the lab. You've been a scientist working with the Juno probe, exploring Jupiter for years. But this is the first time you've witnessed something so unusual. Ganymede is Jupiter's largest moon and the biggest moon in our solar system. If this space body didn't orbit around Jupiter, it would be classified as a planet. It's even bigger than Mercury and Pluto. What makes this moon stand out among others is the fact that it has its own magnetic field. The moon was born around 4.5 billion years ago. It means it's as old as Jupiter itself. This planet-sized space body takes 7 Earth days to orbit its planet. Everyone gathers at the laboratory, impatiently waiting for you to play the recording of the signal coming from space. Your colleagues get their game on, trying to figure out what the source of this mysterious sound is. Around 40% of Ganymede's surface is dark, with craters scattered around, and 60% is light-colored. There are formations that were probably caused by tectonic activity or the release of water from under the surface. Scientists managed to discover a thin layer of oxygen trapped in the moon's atmosphere. The temperatures there are super low, between -170 to -200 degrees Fahrenheit. There isn't much information about how the moon behaves or what chemical elements it hides inside. Some of your colleagues try to create the same conditions that existed when the sound was transmitted. For hours, they sit there waiting, but nothing. Maybe it was a fluke. You get to the control system and activate the Juno spacecraft. The main point of this mission is to observe Jupiter's gravity, magnetic fields, the atmosphere, and the planet's evolution. By the way, there's also some evidence that Jupiter's largest moon is evolving too. Since it has a magnetic field surrounding it, auroras pop up all the time. Those are glowing gas circling the moon's north and south poles. If life existed in such a place, it would probably be at the bottom of Ganymede's extremely salty ocean. For a long time, scientists thought that the sun was a crucial component to kickstart life. But now we know that there are organisms dwelling deep at the bottom of the oceans. Those are doing just fine without sunlight. The oceans of our planet are teeming with some of the most bizarre creatures of all shapes and sizes. Sea lilies live some 10,000 feet underwater. They got their name because they look like flowers, except they're not plants, but animals. Don't be fooled by their stems and leaves. Those are body parts equipped with nerve endings to detect food around them. Goblin sharks are probably some of the most weird-looking sharks that live at the bottom of the ocean. They can grow up to 12 feet long and have a very unusual snout. Now, take a look at the anglerfish. It has a bioluminescent blob on its head to attract prey and navigate its way around the dark ocean floor. It's a natural flashlight that never needs new batteries. It's only the females that have these flashlights, though. The blobfish is another bizarre animal living down there. It lives in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, 9,000 feet under the surface. Anyway, even though you asked everyone to keep the news confidential, it somehow leaks to the media and becomes a new trending topic. You get a call from a news agency. They say they want to interview you about this breakthrough that may prove life exists in outer space. The next day, you head down to the news station to talk about your discovery. You have a whole live studio audience watching your every move as you reach out to grab your glass of water. The crew scurries around doing some last-minute checkups before you're live on air. The makeup artist does some final brush-ups. The sound engineer asks you to test your mic once more. Several of the producers are sitting in the front seats. Bright lights are flooding the studio. The countdown begins. 3, 2, 1, and you're introduced, and the host asks you to explain what it was that you heard. You tell them about the Juno space probe orbiting Jupiter. After a couple of questions, the host finally brings up the most dreaded one. Might the mysterious sound be coming from another civilization? Everyone leans in, waiting for you to answer. You freeze, not knowing what to say. Even though the crushing pressure at the bottom of the ocean is 1,000 times stronger than at sea level, life still exists there. Algae, which is considered a delicacy in the ocean world, is off-menu for deep-sea creatures due to a lack of sunlight. Many of these bottom dwellers have to munch on leftovers instead. Those sink down there from the upper layers of the ocean. The freezing temperatures and the intense pressure have altered the cells of these creatures. This has made them more resilient than the average fish. Bacteria were developing their own ways of surviving. Studies show that they feed on certain gases and chemicals, like sulfur and carbon dioxide. Methane and hydrogen are released when tectonic plates move against each other, and some of these bacteria feast upon those gases too. Tardigrades, also known as water bears, are microscopic critters that can live and thrive in extreme conditions. You can find them in volcanoes, frozen glaciers, and even in the empty void of space, which means that some life forms might actually exist on Ganymede. You explain this to your audience. Then you mention that you don't have enough information to determine if it was another civilization or a natural phenomenon that produced the sound. This doesn't mean that the bottom of Ganymede's freezing oceans isn't teeming with its own bizarre and weird creatures. There might be some legendary beasts like the Kraken or Leviathan there, or weird glowing fish with 2 heads, a fish with tentacles and a large fin, giant crabs. The bacteria there might be as varied as our own. The plants, if they exist there, have to be strong enough to survive the sub-zero temperatures. The animals on Jupiter's largest moon could be as big as our blue whales or as tiny as plankton. After the interview, you head back to the lab to examine the records once more. On your way home, you see posters of yourself with captions like, "Are we not alone?" Hey, you've become a celebrity. Many people take pictures of you. You've been booked by other agencies for more interviews. Some science magazines even want to put you on the front cover as the Person of the Year. Every time you come to work, you wait for the sound to appear again. But nothing. You send a signal from the Juno probe, trying to make some sort of contact with whatever produced the sound. Nothing. That night, you pass out on your desk once more. Eureka moment wakes you up in the middle of the night. There might be something you've missed. You run the numbers again and realize that the answer was in front of you this whole time. It wasn't another civilization that produced this sound. The source was electrons. Every planet produces its own sound. It's created when charged particles from the solar wind and the planet's magnetosphere interact with one another. That's what happened on Ganymede. The electrons in its magnetic field, where the probe picked up the signal, were acting stranger than usual, and this amplified some irregular frequencies. You're embarrassed and spend the rest of your night making phone calls, telling your team the news. The agency that interviewed you releases a statement. They explain that other civilizations aren't trying to contact us. You sit back at your desk, waiting for the next big thing to happen. Europa is another of Jupiter's moons that may host life. It's made up of an iron core, a mantle, and a salty ocean, twice the volume of all the oceans on Earth. And just like Ganymede, the ocean lies under a water ice crust. Scientists claim that there might even be active volcanoes there, and some resilient bacteria may live there. With enough water, certain chemicals, and a source of energy, Europa could produce life. But it's unlikely that we'll find anything but tiny microbes. Wow, the NASA hotline is ringing off the hook. The call center operator is all sweaty from stress. They barely have time to answer the phone, and all the messages they get say the same thing. There's something glowing on the moon. Indeed, hundreds and thousands of amateur astronomers were watching the moon that night. And suddenly, there was a bright light on it, as if someone had lit a powerful spotlight on the surface. Scientists immediately began to look for an explanation to this phenomenon. They first thought it was simply the glow of an airplane flying between the observers and the moon. But then it wouldn't have been seen by so many people from different parts of the world at the same time. The next suspects were the Starlink satellites. Theoretically, one of them could have played a cruel trick on amateur astronomers. They could have mistaken the small satellite's light for a flash of light on the moon. But then again, if the satellite were the culprit of this mess, the flare wouldn't be static, but moving. While some scientists continue to search for an answer to this mystery, others decide to investigate the phenomenon in more detail. For this purpose, they have built a new telescope north of Seville, Spain. The conditions there are quite suitable for observing the moon. The telescope has 2 cameras, controlled remotely from the campus in Germany. If both cameras pick up any unusual phenomenon on the surface of the moon, it will quickly zoom the telescope there to see what's going on. It'll also require advanced artificial intelligence to teach the cameras to distinguish between the unexplained phenomenon on the moon and the light of an airplane, a satellite, or a small meteorite that just entered the Earth's atmosphere. While the telescope is doing its investigation, we already have a theory that may explain the appearance of such bright round flashes on the moon's surface. So, the moon influences the tides of the seas and oceans on Earth with its gravitational force. But the Earth can affect the moon in the same way. Only the force will be 32.5 times stronger. While the moon orbits the Earth, at one point it may be as close to our planet as possible. Then the force of the interaction will be greatest. At this point, tidal forces may force cracks in the surface of the moon to open and release gas from its interior. A powerful jet of gas will lift the lunar dust with it, and what we see as a bright flash through our telescopes is really just a fog of dust, which is round and reflects sunlight well. If you look at it from a distance, it really does look like a flash. As the dust rises, we think there's been a small explosion, and that flash gradually fades as the dust settles down. These things happen all the time on the moon's surface. They're called transient lunar phenomena, and besides lunar flashes, much more mystical and bizarre things have happened. Back in 1178, 5 monks claimed to have seen the moon, being in the shape of a horn, begin to split in 2 from an upper point. Then fire and sparks began to blaze from the place of separation. It was as if a dragon were spewing flames. In the next moment, the moon began to pulsate and then returned to its calm state. This phenomenon was repeated more than 10 times, and the flames took different shapes each time. When this nightmare was over, the moon turned black. It wasn't until the 20th century that scientists tried to explain the phenomenon. They theorized that a large asteroid collided with the moon at the time, and it was this asteroid that should be blamed for creating the Giordano Bruno crater, 15 Brooklyn bridges wide. But in that case, millions of tons of fragments from the asteroid would have hit the Earth as well, and then people would have seen an incredible meteor shower. It would have been very bright, and the memories of it would definitely have been in the archives. But that didn't happen. Now the phenomenon the monks observed seems questionable. Perhaps they did see an asteroid fall, only it was falling on the Earth itself, and they perceived the light from the burning meteorite as something sinister happening on the moon. Or maybe the monks were simply imagining things. There's no witnesses to this event other than them. Another unusual phenomenon is the blue and red lights on the moon. They can be seen when it's horn-shaped, and this occurs most often in the Aristarchus crater. The flashes come and go very quickly, almost like lightning. In fact, this is electricity. Tidal forces are to blame for this too. They cause mechanical stress to build up in the rocks. This can produce an electric field, which creates the blue flashes that have surprised many amateur astronomers. There can also be starbursts on the moon. We can blame this on meteorites that fall on the surface. Because the moon has no atmosphere, asteroids that approach it don't burn up. Having a lot of weight and speed, they cause an explosion on impact. And here on Earth, we see it as a starburst. For example, on May 13, 1972, there was a meteorite impact of 1,000 tons of TNT near where Apollo 14 landed. If we lived much earlier, we might have witnessed constant bright flashes on the moon's surface. All the craters there are formed by such meteor strikes. So imagine the fireworks that were there years ago. And a lot of those meteorites were even useful too. They brought water with them. Yes, there is water on the moon. NASA confirmed this fact after studies with the SOFIA telescope. It was mounted on an airplane. The observations were made from the upper atmosphere of the Earth. At such an altitude, the dry air allowed the telescope to see even the smallest details. Water might have been in the craters at the poles of the moon. These places have never seen light, and the water there might be encased in ice. But SOFIA found water on the sunlit surface of the moon. Of course, it's only H2O molecules that are present in the dust layers, but that's something. If we manage to collect all this water, we'll get very little of it. In comparison, the Sahara Desert has about 100 times more water than we found on the moon. But an even more unusual phenomenon is happening there right now. The moon is actually rusting, just like a piece of old metal. For rust to appear, we need iron, water, and oxygen. Lunar soil has enough iron in it, and as we've already learned, there's some water too. The last piece of the puzzle is oxygen. Everyone knows there's no atmosphere on the moon, and we can't breathe there, but oxygen is still present. The solar wind brought it there. The wind from our warm star moves at an extremely high speed. It scrapes oxygen from the upper parts of our atmosphere and carries it further through space. Eventually, the wind with the oxygen molecules reaches the moon. Voila! All the ingredients for corrosion are in place, and the iron ore on the surface of the moon begins to take on a reddish hue. If this process goes on long enough, in the distant future, the moon will look like Mars. It will turn orange-red. Yes, the signature color of Mars came exactly from that corrosion that began there thousands and thousands of years ago, when there were rivers and seas with water and an atmosphere with oxygen. Other strange objects that can be seen on the moon were left there by humans. Between 1969 and 1972, 12 people visited there as part of the Apollo program. In all, there were 6 landing sites where the astronauts left a bunch of stuff behind. Besides a couple of dozen satellites and spacecraft that fell or landed softly on the moon, there's a lunar rover, some United States flags, a family photo of one of the astronauts, and even 3 golf balls. And the first 2 people to be on the moon left behind a whole pile of stuff. When they were about to go home, they took a lot of soil samples and rocks with them. And to carry it all away, they had to get rid of everything unnecessary on board the lunar module. The TV camera, the sample collection tools, the science equipment, and even the armrests from the seats. The astronauts stood outside the lunar module for a full 8 minutes and threw out a whole mountain of unnecessary items. If you collect all these objects and debris that we left there by 12 astronauts and put them on the scales, it will show about 199 tons. It's like 3 heavy armored tanks or 3 large passenger planes. Strange, but true. Okay, I officially give up on the hope that the moon is made of cheese after all. Wow, not even Gouda. The shiny lunar ball, or a curved banana, or half of a coin, depending on what phase it's in, has different layers inside, just like Earth. One of these layers is called the inner core. About 20 years ago, scientists were observing how the moon rotates. Using that data, they concluded that it had a fluid outer core. But the inner core was hard to study, so they didn't know if it was solid like a rock or molten like a hot liquid. But things are clearer now. Astronomers have collected data from different missions, including the Apollo missions, where astronauts went to the moon and gathered information themselves. Plus, they've used a special technique called seismic data. This method is all about studying how sound waves move through things. Take earthquakes on our planet as an example. When an earthquake happens, it creates waves that travel through the ground. Scientists can detect and analyze these waves to learn more about Earth's interior. The same idea can apply to other objects in our solar system, or planets, or, in this case, the moon. When quakes or moonquakes happen, they generate sound waves, and by carefully listening to and studying these waves, scientists can create a detailed map of what's inside the object. They can figure out things like different layers, what they're made of, and how they're arranged. To check the moon's deep interior, scientists also use something called laser ranging. This method measures the distance between the surface of the Earth and the moon very precisely. And ta-da! Our natural satellite's inner core is a dense, solid ball made of iron, just like Earth's. It's about 310 miles wide, which is nearly 15% the size of the entire moon. Researchers also have stumbled upon evidence that supports the theory that the layer between the moon's surface and its core, called the mantle, has been moving around as the moon evolved over time. This movement is something we call lunar mantle overturn, and it could explain why we find elements rich in iron on the lunar surface. Mantle material ends up being carried upward, and the volcanic rock remains in the moon's crust. Some of the materials in this rock were too dense, like me, so they just sank back through the lighter crust material all the way to the core mantle boundary. It's like a cycle where the moon's mantle material goes up during volcanic activity, carries iron-rich elements to the surface, and then sinks back down. There's another mystery scientists have been trying to solve. What caused the moon's magnetic field to weaken and nearly disappear over time? It seems that now that we know about the iron core and the global mantle overturn, we might get some more answers about the moon's magnetic field. Knowing what the inner core is like can help us better understand the moon's history as well as the history of our entire solar system. Now, one of the theories that's widely accepted about the origin of the moon says there was a massive collision between Earth, in its early stages, and another mysterious object in our solar system. It's called the Large Impact Theory, and this collision was so strong it ripped off a big chunk of the primitive molten Earth. I mean, not so big compared to what's left. If you put a US nickel next to a green pea, you get a good idea of how big our planet is compared to the moon. Now, this chunk was set into orbit around our planet, and this might have happened about 95 million years after our solar system formed. The object that collided with Earth could have been about 10% the mass of our home planet and roughly the size of Mars. Well, it makes sense. Earth and the Moon do have similar compositions after all. Of course, there are other ideas about how the Moon formed. One says that the gravitational force of our planet captured it. This means that the Moon was just an object innocently passing by when suddenly it got attracted and pulled into Earth's orbit. There's even a hypothesis that Earth stole the Moon from Venus. Ooh. In that case, the Moon shouldn't complain. I guess the view is way better here. So yeah, the Moon and Earth are similar when it comes to rocks and some minerals. But the Moon doesn't have the same atmosphere as our planet. Its atmosphere is thin and consists of some weird gases that include potassium and sodium, which is not something you can find in the atmosphere of Mars, Venus, or Earth. And the rocks on the Moon don't contain water. But that doesn't mean there's no water at all up there. A long time ago, in the 17th century, astronomers saw large dark spots on the Moon's surface. One of these astronomers thought these spots looked like oceans, and he called them Maria, which means seas in Latin. Other astronomers also made maps of the moon, and they used the term Maria to describe these dark spots. For example, Mare Tranquillitatis translates to Sea of Tranquility, where Apollo 11 made its touchdown. But it seems those dark spots are not actually oceans. They are plains made of hardened lava that erupted long ago. These volcanic eruptions left behind smooth flat areas called basalt plains. In the late 1800s, one sky watcher studied the moon and found it didn't have an atmosphere. Without an atmosphere, there are no clouds and no air to keep water from evaporating. So scientists thought that any water on the moon would just disappear right away. They believed the moon was totally dry. But then, in 1961, one physicist had a different idea. He pointed out there could be water on the moon in special areas called permanently shadowed regions. These are spots on the moon where the sun doesn't shine, so they stay dark all the time. Water ice could exist in these dark areas because they're extremely cold and the ice wouldn't evaporate. But when astronauts from the Apollo missions went to the moon, they brought back soil samples, and scientists found no signs of water in them. So everyone went back to thinking that the moon was completely dry. In the 90s, NASA focused on these shadowed craters and found high concentrations of hydrogen, which meant there could be ice at the moon's poles. They still weren't certain, so they kept digging and after a while found hydrogen trapped inside tiny beads of volcanic glass. Since there are no active volcanoes on the moon today, which means water probably was present on the moon when these volcanoes erupted long ago. Plus, there could be way more water back in the early days of our moon. In 2020, NASA's SOFIA mission showed us what we'd been looking for a really long time. There is water on the moon after all. It turns out the water is hidden within the grains of lunar dust or sticking to the surface in the sunlit areas of the moon. So there are no oceans like we have on Earth, but at least there's something. The question remains, how did water even get there? It seems the moon had a chaotic history back at the time when it was forming, as probably most of the planets and moons in our solar system. So there is some evidence that water came there from comets hitting its surface back in the old days, or maybe even keeps on coming from those that are slamming into the moon right now. We're talking about a chaotic situation where icy micrometeorites collide with the moon's surface, and dust then makes an even bigger mess when interacting with the solar wind. But we're waiting to find out more about this. Because, as we all know, when you mention water, you also inevitably talk about life. That's why we want to know more, for instance, about all that ice hidden in polar craters on the moon. Maybe it can teach us more about how life developed on Earth. Maybe comets brought all the necessary elements here. Then, what if there are some of those elements stuck in the ice on the moon, too?
Have you ever thought about Earth itself as an intelligent, well, not creature, but maybe an entity? Like it has a mind and some survival instincts of its own. When said like this, it sounds like you're about to watch a fantasy movie where the planet we walk and live our daily lives on will suddenly wake up, realize it doesn't like us that much after all, and just go crazy. Hope not. But we're not actually talking about such scenarios. More of the idea that the collective activity of life, like microbes and plants, can change a planet and give it a life of its own. It's like the planet has a green mind. The metaphor of Earth as a living planet makes sense. Creatures across the globe crawl, swim, walk, and fly through the uppermost layers of our land, ocean, and sky. Plants cover much of our world. Plus, there are viruses and bacteria in the water, soil, and even atmosphere. Now imagine all the living things on Earth, like plants, animals, and microbes, as a giant team working together. They have different jobs, but they all do their thing to make the planet a better place to live. For example, plants make oxygen that we breathe, and animals help pollinate flowers. Together, they form the biosphere. which is like the Earth's team of life. That's where the idea of planetary intelligence comes in. Just like individuals and groups can be intelligent, so can an entire planet. Researchers believe we should measure the planet's intelligence by its ability to keep itself going forever. And just like how humans need to work together to survive, a planet's collective intelligence is measured by the capacity of all the life on it to work together towards this same goal. It's like the planet is a complex system that knows how to take care of itself. Like forests. They can share nutrients through their secret underground networks of fungi. This helps all the trees stay healthy. We can obviously learn a lot from forests. If we jump into the fantasy universe while looking for intelligent, conscious planets, we'd definitely choose Mogo from Green Lantern. It's a specific planetary entity that can do things like changing its weather and altering gravity, plant growth, or some other surface conditions. Or how about the stunning Pandora from Avatar? Do you remember the fascinating scenes of flora and fauna there? With organs that might remind you of tentacles. They enable creatures to interlink with each other on a neural level. It's like the entire planet is like one giant brain, with many smaller trees, creatures, and its other pieces as its cells. We're far from that, but it's still nice to imagine. At the moment, our civilization is in the stage scientists named an immature technosphere. That means we're still too focused on using technology that doesn't always do good for our planet. We don't have a planetary intelligence or a collective understanding of what needs to be done to do better for our planet. Instead, we're all just doing our own thing. I mean, we're not at the worst stage. Researchers have come up with 4 stages of Earth's past and future to explain how planetary intelligence could impact the long-term future of humanity. The first stage is what we call the immature biosphere. It's when life first started on Earth, billions of years ago. Only microbes were there on the bare land without any vegetation. There wasn't any global feedback, which means these microbes couldn't yet affect Earth, its atmosphere, or other systems in any way. The second stage is the mature biosphere, which was 2.5 billion to 540 million years ago, when stable continents formed and the biosphere started to have a strong influence on the Earth. The third stage, known as immature technosphere, is where we are now, with interlinked systems of communication, technology, transportation, electricity, and computers that draw resources from Earth's systems and affect the biosphere. The fourth stage, also known as the mature technosphere, is where Earth should aim to be in the future. It means technology will benefit the entire planet. We'll use sustainable forms of energy, like solar power. Planetary intelligence is the sign of a mature planet, and researchers are trying to figure out how we can move towards it. So, things we do on an individual level do matter. The collective activity of life, like microbes or plants, can change a planet and make it more than just a lifeless rock floating in space. Through the biosphere, our home planet kind of figured out how to host life by itself billions of years ago, and it's still going. Now we need to figure out how to have a similar kind of self-maintaining system, but this time with the technosphere. It's hard to imagine planets could generally become sentient, like Pandora, or some other imaginary conscious world out there. There are a few reasons for that. First, planets form based on how different materials, like rocks, gases, and liquids gather around a new star. It's like you have a big family gathering, where everyone brings different ingredients to make a delicious dish. And just like how these ingredients won't suddenly turn into a living being, the materials that make up a planet won't just turn into self-aware creatures. On Earth, after billions of years of complex chemical reactions, some molecules started to replicate themselves and carry information. That's how life on our planet began. And Earth is the only such example we have. Here's the second reason. Imagine you have a big garden where you plant a lot of mushrooms or bacteria, hoping they'll become really smart and help you take care of the garden. But mushrooms and bacteria don't have brains like we do. It's not like they need it anyway. Having a big brain is really expensive for animals, too. It takes a lot of energy to keep it running. So, animals only become as smart as they need to be to survive and thrive in their environment. Dogs and cats are pretty smart because they need to be able to avoid danger and find food. They don't need human kind of intelligence for things like building houses, creating art, or inventing new technologies. So, it would be hard to bring all living beings and plants to the same level of intelligence. The third reason why it would be difficult for a planet to become sentient is the main rule of the animal kingdom. Life is all about survival of the fittest. Every creature is competing for resources like water, food, and space. But not only do different species compete against each other, but individuals within the same species also fight. Just think of how fiddler crabs fight for territory on the beach, or how wolf packs fight over prey. Or me, when I see an empty spot on a crowded beach. This kind of competition is not a good base for global cooperation. There are a couple of exceptions to this rule. For example, ants. They may not be the brightest creatures on the planet, but when they come together in colonies, they can achieve amazing things, like gathering food that's way bigger than them, building nests, raising young, and even farming. In fact, they act like a superorganism called a hive mind, where every ant works together towards a common goal. Insects like bees and ants are very altruistic and work together to ensure their queen reproduces. If one large ant colony took over our whole planet, it could act as a single mind and work towards the colony's and planet's interests until they run out of resources. But in reality, it's hard to imagine any organism, even a superorganism, could reach such a level of self-awareness and consciousness. Number 5. How could we keep in contact? When it comes to communication, ants use pheromones and humans use nerves. Both of these methods work well for small organisms, but when it comes to a giant planet-sized entity, it would be hard to make such communication fast and efficient. So, communication within a planet-sized entity would be much slower than what we have in our homes, like our computers or smartphones. Oh well, we'll just continue dreaming about Pandora. For thousands of years, people knew only about the planets Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, which they could see using simple telescopes, or even by the naked eye if conditions were good. But in the late 18th century, a famous astronomer named Sir William Herschel discovered a new planet that was icy blue in color. At first, people thought it was a star, but later they realized it was a planet. Today, we know it as Uranus, a planet that's more than 19 times farther away from the Sun than Earth. It's so far away that it takes Uranus 84 years to complete one trip around the Sun. This astronomer also discovered many other interesting things in space, like double stars and nebulae. In the mid-1800s, scientists noticed something pulled Uranus and strangely tugged its orbit. They thought there must be another planet out there, and they used math to predict where it would be. Finally, in 1846, they found Neptune using a telescope. It was too faint to see with the naked eye because it was too far away from the Sun. It was all so exciting. Who knows how many other planets could be there, lurking in the darkness of our solar system? Back in the mid-1800s, astronomers noticed something unusual was happening in the sky. A small rocky planet named Mercury was behaving strangely. It didn't follow the predictable orbit that was expected of it. One of the astronomers was a brilliant French scientist named Urbain Le Verrier. He came up with a theory that there could be another planet in our solar system no one had yet discovered. It would be located somewhere between Mercury and the Sun. This hypothetical planet, which he named Vulcan after the Roman god of fire, would have an incredibly hot surface, and it could be a potential explanation for Mercury's strange behavior. He never surely claimed Vulcan was really the one thing disturbing the orbit of Mercury. But, excited by the possibility of discovering a new planet, astronomers all over the world took the idea of Vulcan. For a planet that didn't exist, people committed to developing ideas and getting information about it. Some scientists didn't think it was likely that they had missed another planet as big as Mercury. It would have been hard not to see it by then. But there was a tiny chance of a smaller planet existing inside Mercury's orbit that was too close to the Sun, so no one could see it. One theory said it was about 13 million miles away from the Sun. Mercury is the planet with the most eccentric orbit in our solar system, but the closest point it gets to the Sun is about 28.5 million miles. This means Vulcan would be under half of that distance. The theory moved on, saying that if Vulcan existed, it would orbit the Sun every 19 days and 18 hours, and its path would be tilted about 12 degrees relative to the path of other planets in our solar system. Vulcan's position at its furthest point from the Sun would still be too close to the Sun to be seen with the naked eye, even during twilight. The only chance of seeing Vulcan would be during a solar eclipse, or when it passed in front of the Sun, which, as the theory said, would be 2 to 4 times a year. They had a theory that this mysterious planet was so close to the Sun that it could only be seen during a total solar eclipse when the Moon blocked out the Sun's blinding glare. So, every time there was an eclipse, scientists would peer at the Sun, hoping to catch a glimpse of Vulcan. They were trying really hard, but no matter what, they couldn't find this mysterious planet. Some astronomers claim to have spotted it during eclipses, but no one could ever confirm or find evidence for that. The theory of Vulcan was left waiting for some better times. Einstein had a different idea. You know about his theory of general relativity, right? That's where he claimed gravity wasn't some sort of natural force, but a result of space-time curved because of the presence of giant space objects, like planets and stars. Planets circle around the Sun in their usual orbit because space-time is curved. That means the planets are kind of falling towards the central star of our solar system. And Einstein tried to explain Mercury's unusual orbit using his own theory of relativity. Unlike the other planets in our solar system, Mercury's orbit wasn't that circular. Instead, it seemed to wobble slightly, as if there was an invisible force pulling it away. Einstein said this could be happening because the massive gravity of our Sun was actually curving the fabric of space-time around it. He claimed it's possible this changed Mercury's orbit a little bit. It took the scientific community a while to test this theory, but it eventually seemed like the most plausible explanation. Even though Einstein's theory gave us a more elegant explanation for Mercury's strange orbit, some scientists were still holding out hope for Vulcan. It was especially hard to let go of the idea of Vulcan because Mercury is also the planet that's really hard to see from where we're standing. But later, more and more scientists started accepting Einstein's theory above their imagination. And they would observe a total solar eclipse specifically to test Einstein's theory of relativity, not because of Vulcan. And Vulcan is not the only hypothetical planet everyone was talking about. In the newer age, some believe there could be a mysterious planet lurking in the outer part of our solar system. But this one is more likely to exist. No one has seen it directly yet, but computer simulations show this so-called Planet 9, or Planet X, is probably somewhere there beyond Neptune. Neptune and Planet X could be similar in size. Planet X could be 10 times more massive than Earth and circles around our Sun in an elongated shape, which is on average 20 times farther from the Sun than Neptune. A year there may last between 10,000 to 20,000 Earth years. By comparison, a year on Neptune lasts 165 Earth years. Something this big moving out there beyond Neptune could explain the unusual orbits of smaller objects in the Kuiper Belt. The Kuiper Belt is the area of our solar system beyond Neptune and where it orbits. And there are most likely many asteroids, comets, and some other smaller bodies there, mostly made of ice. There was another hypothetical planet called Nibiru. Remember those rumors that the world could end back in 2012? One of the popular scenarios was Nibiru, which some claimed would hit our home planet at the end of the year. Of course, nothing happened. We're still here, all set and good, but the idea of Nibiru seemed interesting. Stories started in the 1970s when a man named Zecharia Sitchin mentioned Nibiru in his book, The 12th Planet, claiming it orbits the sun every 3,600 years. But there's no chance a planet with such an eccentric orbit wouldn't disrupt other planets in our solar system with its gravity. And if it was really coming that close to Earth in 2012, we were supposed to be able to see it with the naked eye. Some simple calculations showed Nibiru would have been nearly as bright as Mars at its dimmest and brighter than the faintest stars you see from a city. Oh well, maybe we'll have more luck in the next 3,500 and something years. In 2011, a comet named Elenin appeared that many people thought could be Nibiru. But when you're looking at comets and planets through a telescope, you see they appear differently. A comet has a coma, which is a gas atmosphere, together with a tail, something a planet doesn't have. Plus, this comet didn't slam into the Earth. It came too close to our sun and fell apart. The leftover pieces will continue moving on their way to the outer solar system for the next 12,000 years.
An hour after people disappear, most urban areas will be left empty and quiet. Perhaps the sound of wind, falling leaves, or other natural sounds previously drowned out by city noise and traffic will be heard. The subways of many cities are protected from groundwater by a system of pumps. If there are no people to monitor such systems, most subways will flood within 36 hours. Due to malfunctions, sewage treatment plants will stop working, leading to pollution of rivers and lakes with wastewater. The water pipes in Detroit will become unusable, leading to the flooding of the city. Food in refrigerators will spoil. Raccoons and wolves will inhabit abandoned human homes. Major airports will be covered in rust and overgrown with ivy. Cruise ships in Alaska will sink under the weight of ice that accumulates on them. Lions from the San Diego Zoo will gradually escape, emboldened by the power outage of the electric fence around their enclosures. More and more black cats will appear on the streets of Rome and the Vatican. Rats and mice will consume all edible reserves and leave the cities. Plants will begin to grow in cracks in streets, highways, sidewalks, and buildings. More and more animals will notice the absence of people and flock to the cities. International Space Station will gradually decrease. Since no one will correct its orbit, the station will eventually fall to Earth and burn up. Along with it, digitized samples of human DNA will perish. A large part of the city's territory will be covered with a vegetation of lianas, grasses, and tree seedlings. The Red Square in Moscow will have a layer of soil and thick grasses growing, making the square completely green. Despite high levels of radiation, animal populations are increasing in abandoned areas. Plants have grown in many houses and buildings. Seawater will flood cities that were once drained by artificial drainage systems, such as London and Amsterdam. Satellites will begin to fall to Earth. Since no one maintained their speed of movement, they slowly approached Earth and eventually fell to the planet's surface. Wolves now roam freely around the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, and wild boars will be seen in Paris. Human speech will be preserved in rare words that parrots have memorized during their years of living with humans. Snakes will not only reproduce at incredible rates, but also grow much larger in size. Their main prey will be rodents that have multiplied in the first years after humans disappeared. Many human-made structures will collapse within 100 years, primarily those with a large number of steel elements. Fruit Christmas cakes, thanks to their alcohol coating, will not only retain their appearance but also freshness. Most buildings will be overtaken by plants and animals, and the city will resemble more of a wild nature landscape. The period of nuclear fuel decay will come to an end, and as a result, dead zones around the ruins of nuclear power plants will once again become habitable. The last parrots that spoke human language may go extinct since they memorized human speech, but it is simply not necessary for their survival in the wild. All modern carriers of information that preserve human culture, laser discs, photographic film, paper, and the like, will turn to dust. Rebar inside concrete buildings, which are more durable than steel ones, will expand 3 times due to rust, causing the destruction of concrete structures. Most modern cities will be covered by a green blanket, and collapsed skyscrapers and buildings will become new hills. Manhattan will return to its former state before human settlement, with numerous streams and lakes. There will be almost no evidence of the existence of human civilization. Only powerful stone buildings that rely solely on the force of gravity will survive, such as Notre Dame de Paris. Of the products that existed during human civilization, only honey, especially in clay pots, and oil in wooden barrels, will be well preserved. Only a few stone structures will survive, including the pyramids in Giza and the Sphinx, almost entirely buried in the sands of the desert, and fragments of the Great Wall of China. By this time, a new ice age will begin on Earth. It is expected that the KEO satellite will enter the atmosphere by this time. Various pieces of space debris will collide with it during its descent, but this will not destroy the satellite. Eventually, it will fall into the waters of the world ocean. Remnants of spacecraft and satellite debris will float through space as the only reminder of human civilization.